Okay, Assalamu alaikum and good morning everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on this live webinar on the topic of Islamic financial leases. I think this is a very important topic, especially living in a Western world, and we'd like to understand our halal options living in a Western world. So we have Dr. Mahmood Nathie, who is an Islamic finance scholar and a practitioner. He also teaches into our Islamic studies major, as mentioned earlier, which is coming live in 2021. We are very excited. And Dr. Nathie is, has immense experience in accounting, in finance, and especially in Islamic finance. So if you'd like to find out more about him, we've got him on our website. Without further ado or wasting your time and mine, over to you, Dr. Nathie.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome. This presentation is all about Islamic leases because I received so many inquiries about people wanting to finance their homes or finance a car or anything of that sort. And so I thought it's appropriate in today's time, with all the difficulties, financial difficulties that we're facing, to explain to you what is going on in the world as in relation to how Islamic financial institutions go about financing, let's say, homes. One of the main instruments that Islamic institutions use these days is what they call ijarah, which is equivalent of leases. And if you are leasing a home or an office or a shop or something, you'll know what I'm referring to. So Islamic ijarah or leases in fiqh refers to something that one gives in return for the joy and benefit of receiving something else. In other words, I pay rental to someone and I get the benefit of staying in that house or property. And the lessee, which is the person who, excuse me, the lessee is the person who leases the property from the owner. In this case, the owner is the lessor. And we say that as a result of paying the rental, he or she, the lessee, will get the benefit of enjoyment of the property, which we call a usufruct, or, and I'll show you later, which we call in Islam a different terminology. So, the one that, so here we are, the parties to a lease are basically the lessor and the lessee. And in fiqh mu'amalat, which is the law of transactions, we call the lessor the mu'jir and the lessee is a mustajir. The rental is called ujra and the usufruct is called manfa'. So I'm just giving you a very brief overview of these terms. Of course, when you read a common lease agreement, you won't find these terms appearing. You will always find the other terminology like lessor and lessee, rentals and usufructs. So how does Islamic leasing works in today's time, and what type of leases do the institutions use? Here on this screen that you see, leases are mainly divided into typical what we call finance leases, and then there's other that are equity-based. The one that is used most commonly by a lot of the Australian institutions is the one that we call Al-Ijarah Muntahiyah Bit-Tamlik, or AIMBIT if you are in Malaysia. This is the shorter version. And then the other one is a lease ending with a sale. And the third one is a lease deferred with deferred payments. I'll explain to you in detail what these leases are and how they operate. But for now, I want to concentrate on this one here, which is Al-Ijarah Muntahiyah Bit-Tamlik, which is the most common one that everyone uses. So here is a typical lease structure. Here, if you are the customer, and let's suppose you have identified a house in one of the suburbs and you wish to buy this house, you would typically go to a financier, and the financier will say, okay, what is the cost of the house? And you will say the cost is X, or 500, 600, whatever. The financier will then do their own financial investigation on your credit worthiness. And if you are a customer with a good credit record, they will approve the loan or the purchase of that house. What then happens is that the financier will appoint you, that is a customer, to go and act on its behalf. In other words, you become the agent of the financier. And then you will negotiate with the seller. And once you've done the negotiation, you will then get to the financier, and the financier will say, okay, we will enter into another agreement. And this time the agreement will be agreement of lease. So basically what happens is the financier then pays the seller of the house, and then enters into a contract with you, the customer, on a lease basis. And the lease is structured such that you will pay the financier rental payment, an agreed rental payment over 10, 20, 30 years. And at the maturity of the lease, the ownership will pass on to you. However, understand that because of technical reasons and because of stamp duty problems that we have in this country, usually the financier will register the property in your name so as to avoid you paying a much larger amount in transfer duty in 10, 20 or 30 years time. So Al-Ijarah Muntahiyah Bit-Tamlik refers to lease to own. And I noticed that even in the conventional methodology these days, there is a move towards what they call rent to own, which is really the same as lease to own. So typically, the Islamic lease in this country, that is Australia, will replicate a conventional financial lease. And like before, the financial institution buys the assets and leases it to you. And because the owner is the lessor, it bears the risk of ownership. So if anything happens to the property, it is the risk of the lessor. However, what really happens is that the lessor will ask you, that is the occupier of the house, the lessee, to take out insurance, and it will then be the beneficiary in that insurance policy. That is a condition that you enter into at the beginning of the lease. Now, one might say, well, insurance is not really Islamically acceptable. However, there are many opinions, and the best opinions that we've seen so far, one that has been approved by people like Mufti Taqi Uthmani, is that in this particular instance, it is permissible. So who uses these type of leases? In Australia, I'm going to refer to two organizations that typically use the Ijarah Muntahiyah Bit-Tamlik. One is MCCA and the other one is Amana. What happens is that you will negotiate with MCCA exactly as I said before. In this case, MCCA is a financier. Many people will ask, well, is MCCA really the financier, or is there someone else behind MCCA that provides the money for MCCA to do that? I'm not going to go into that because really it's a very lengthy discussion and something that that requires many hours of explaining. However, I'd like you to look at some of the conditions that MCCA imposes. Here on the screen, I'm not sure if you can see my screen. If anyone can.
Yes, we can.
Is it visible?
Yes, it is. It's very visible.
Okay. I want to go to clause 7 and 8. And 7 and 8 says that at settlement, MCCA becomes the owner of the property and permits the agent to register his or her name on the title, which is what I explained earlier. Now, upon payment of the monies financed by MCCA, the agent reassumes the rights from MCCA through the last rental payment, where he or she becomes the full owner of the property. Now, what point number 8 means is that after so many years, when you've paid the agreed rental, the property will then revert to you. As opposed to a non-conventional lease where you will enter into an ordinary lease and that property will not be yours. For instance, if you lease a property in one of the shopping centers, that is what we call an operating lease. So the operating lease belongs, the lease or the leased property does not belong to you, it belongs to the lessor and it will never revert to you. Another company that uses this form of lease financing is called Amana. And Amana also uses a concept similar to Al-Ijara Mintahiyya bi-Tamlik, but they call it straight Al-Ijara contract. And one of the conditions that I'd like to read to you is this one here. If a customer is seen as paying rental, what happens if the customer terminates the agreement partway through? Now, this has become a very, very contentious issue. I'm going to come to that later, but I just want to show you that in these leases that are used by these institutions, all these conditions are there. Very, very often people don't read the fine print. And when there are problems, especially default problems or problems where the lessor or the lessee cannot pay the rentals, what happens then? Now, these are very important issues and something that has been bugging the industry for many, many years. How do we overcome these problems? Well, in a way, a lot of these institutions have now devise methods of preventing you, that is the lessee, from defaulting. And some of these are, yeah, when you, some of these are straight from the Quran. The problems that we face today is that people are losing their jobs, they don't have a fixed income, and as a result, they cannot then finance their these obligations. Under those circumstances, the Quran is very, very specific. Say, when kana zu usrin fanaziratun illa maysara, and you can read the full listening surah, the verse there. And it said, if the debtor is in straitened circumstances, then let there be postponement of the lease, and that you will remit the debt as an almsgiving would be benefit if you did so. However, you must understand that financial institutions are not, they're not there to do you a favor. and debt forgiveness for them is very, very difficult because they're in the business of making money. So they rely on what they call Qard Hasana accounts. Typically what happens is that a bank would collect sometimes money that they collect from people who are unable to pay, and as a result they charge them a certain fee for late payment, and the fee that they charge as such cannot be used for anything else but to help people in need. And so they keep these amounts in an account called a Qard Hasana account. So if you or I are in straitened circumstances and we are unable to meet our lease obligation, then the institution will then have recourse to that account, take out some money, and then pay the lost or the payments that have been missed. They will take that amount out from a Qard Hasana account and credit it to your account. In other words, you will then not be technically in default. However, remember that in Islamic law, once you incur a debt, that debt remains with you until the day you die, unless the creditor is somewhat well disposed in giving you relief, or even writing off the debt, or even giving you partial reduction of the debt. So Islamic institutions usually will not do that. They will keep the debt on their books for as long as possible, as long as you are committed to pay the debt. So what happens is, if you are in such circumstances that you are unable to pay at all, and you cannot get the money from anywhere or from anyone, then in those particular circumstances, the owner, which is the lessor, will then exercise its mortgage clauses and put you into default. When that happens, all the previous payments that you have paid are technically lost, and you would be in the same position as you were on day one when you did not have the money in your pocket. I want to share with you some calculations that I've done, and to explain exactly what I've been talking about. Here you see on the screen a typical example of an interest-based mortgage. Again, can everyone see my screen? Ramila?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So here, let's assume that you have bought a house for $111,000, and I'll tell you why it's such an awkward amount, because after 10%, it's the balance outstanding the $100,000. Now you go to the institutions, and the institution says, okay, we will finance $100,000, and then if you apply this formula here, we call it these are finance formula, the mathematics of finance, and they can calculate in very, very fine detail what your payments would be, in this case, over 60 months. Now here I've done the calculation. You can see that starting with a balance of $100,000, if you were to pay $1,887 every month, then after 60 months, the balance is zero. What have you paid over that period? You've paid $13,064 in interest, and your total payment equals the amount that they've charged you for the capital plus the interest. What does an Islamic financial institution do? Well, typically what they would do is they'll take the 100,000, and then for 5 years they will work out their profit margin. In this case, the profit margin works out to $5,000, which is 5% of 100,000 for 5 years, which is 125,000. And then what they do is the $125,000 is divided by 60 months, which gives you a payment of $2,083. So here you see the different methodologies that are used. However, in my experience over the years, I found that the Islamic institutions do exactly what the riba institutions do. They use the same formula, but instead of adding, let's say 5% per annum, what they do, they do the same calculation, and then they take the 13,000 and just merely add the 13,000 to the 100,000 and then divide it, which gives you exactly that figure there. Now, there are, in my opinion, a lot of people that would say, well, what is the difference now between this type of financing and Islamic financing? Because really, typically, they use the same methods for calculation their interest or their profit. It is true. However, there are major differences. The major differences is this, that once an Islamic institution adds this amount to the capital amount, that remains fixed. In other words, they cannot alter that amount over the 60-month period. In a typical mortgage or any bank mortgage, what happens is that if the interest rates drop, like if the interest rate is say 5% there, and if the interest rate, let's say, drops to 4%, see what happens. Then then your payments reduces. Or if the typical interest today in Australia is about say 3.5%. So what happens there? Your monthly payments reduces. Now this cannot happen in an Islamic finance contract because the payments are fixed. In other words, your payments are fixed at 2,083. So these are some of the technical differences between Islamic mortgages and non-Islamic or Ribawi mortgages. Of course, you have the position where some of the banks will say, okay, we, instead of this formula here, will resort to some other formula where based on a negotiated profit rate, which is also allowed. And once that is agreed, then that amount remains fixed. It cannot be altered. So going back to our original screen, where are we? So I've just lost my screen there. I want to explain something with regard to defaults and early settlement. And here I have borrowed some material from one of the Malaysian banks or institutions. Now, typically what happens is that, let's suppose that you are in difficulty, and because you are able to pay these months, let's say after 24 months, the balance outstanding is $62,000. Now, in a conventional bank, they would ask you to pay $62,000, which is the balance outstanding. And they'll probably charge you a 1 or 2% penalty for default. Or otherwise, if you say to the bank, look, I have the money, somebody's given me the finance and I'd like to settle this amount, then they would say, okay, we will charge you the balance outstanding plus a fee, probably 1 or 2% added to that. In an Islamic lease, what happens is that if you were to go to an Islamic institution and say, look, my uncle or my friend has given me the money to settle this debt, can we make a settlement? They said, yes, we will make a settlement, but really you owe us the balance between 100,000 and this amount here. In other words, they will not forgive you for all these amounts that are still outstanding. In other words, you have entered into a contract, a fixed contracts, as a result of which that is the Islamic financial institution will insist that you pay them the lease installments that are yet to be paid in future. In other words, they will insist on a full payment of the 90,000 plus their profit margin. Whereas in a typical mortgage, you can go and settle your mortgage anytime, whatever the balance is outstanding, plus a penalty. So this is one of the problems that have arisen throughout the Islamic world, as a result of which the Malaysian government has now introduced legislation making it compulsory for any Islamic institution to give you two types of accounts. The one account is that they will show you exactly what is on the screen here. The other account will tell you exactly what you will be paying if you were to opt for early settlement, or for that matter, what the amount would be if you are in default. So these are some of the technical issues that has been addressed in Islamic countries that have Islamic laws covering, Islamic finance. What happens in Australia is another matter. And here I've come across 2 or 3 persons that had the ability to go to the Islamic financial institution and negotiate a settlement. And the institution there turned around and said, yes, we'd like to settle, no problem, but you have to pay us the balance of all the rentals that hasn't been paid in the future. I think I'm going to stop there because I'm pretty sure that a lot of you will have questions that you'd like to pose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Nathie. That was very in-depth and educational. We do now open for any questions that you may have. Please unmute yourself if you've got questions, and Dr. Nathie is here to answer them. So, floor is open. If you're too shy to speak up, please post it in the chat, and I'll be happy to read it out for you.
May I ask a question, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmood, and thank you, Ramila. My name is Professor Dr. Ali Hassan, and I'm working at Torrens University, and I have a lot of interest in Islamic teachings and, tafsir and so many other things. So I'm just attending this course out of my own interest. My question is that I've explored a lot of parties here in Australia that are offering Islamic ijarah. And now I'm not very sure about the nomenclature that they have. Some say it's ijarah, and some have a different name to it. But one of the questions that is normally sent to me is that what if these institutions are sort of taking money again from the conventional banks and giving ultimately if they're involved in the interest business in one way or another. That's my first question. I hope that's clear. And the second one is that eventually the whole idea of the Islamic Islamic system not promoting interest into the society is that eventually there should not be any exploitation. But as an ordinary person, when I go to a conventional bank versus when I go to a to Islamic financing body in Australia, I see that I'm ending up paying much more than what I actually pay to the bank. From a philosophical viewpoint, that's something that always bothers me. And in relation to that, I know that given the inflation rate, and my area is basically business and technology, and so I'm into economics, and I'm also into Islamic studies and whatever. So what bothers me is that eventually when I would go to the bank and the rates what they are offering me versus the kind of inflation we have, that versus what an Islamic institution is offering versus the inflation and everything, as an economist, it doesn't make sense to me, honestly. But from an Islamic viewpoint, I do agree that the Islamic institutions here are doing a very good job. I agree with that. So probably if my question is probably too subjective, allow me to clarify. Otherwise, sir, if you could answer. Thank you.
Okay. Look, I was asking this question anyway. In reply to your first question, where do the institution get their money from, and whether that is a concern? Many years ago, when the industry started, there's about 30 or 35 years ago, there were no sort of proper guidelines of where the monies should come from and whose money and what type of money. And then the government in Qatar issued a decree saying that if you are an Islamic institution, then you should be a fully fledged Islamic institution. Because at that time, a lot of the institutions in Malaysia and elsewhere had two windows, the conventional window and the Islamic window. Now, the logic was, if you have two windows there and you get the money, all the money gets pooled together, or is the money separated? That's the first question. If the money is pooled together, it means that the financing is coming from a pool of conventional and non-conventional sources. If the money is coming from an Islamic source and it is kept separately, then we know that that money is coming from, let's call it now, say, a halal source. So Qatar was able to implement this policy that if you are in this space of Islamic finance, then you must be wholly involved in it. You cannot have two different systems, operating parallel. What happens now with other institutions? In Malaysia, I know for the fact that even institutions like Maybank, which is the largest bank there, they are very, very cautious in keeping their funds from Islamic sources separate from the non-Islamic sources. Wallahu alam, I don't know in the background how they would then do the financing, where the money would come from. I cannot judge that. However, a lot of people are of the opinion that if the money is coming from a non-Islamic source, what does it matter then? Whether you go to an Islamic institution or whether you go to a conventional financial institution, it doesn't matter, because here, in this case, Australian Islamic financial institutions are just mortgage brokers, really speaking. They are just the front end. The back end comes from somewhere else, mainly from insurance companies. And the reason is that insurance companies are very, very prudent in their lending. And by law, they have to invest their money in gilt-edged securities, one of which is first mortgages. So one can question the validity of this argument that if the funds are coming from a non-Islamic source, then it doesn't matter really whether you go to a conventional or Islamic institution. How that argument pans out in other countries, I'm not sure. But I think certainly you have a point there that it is a concern and it doesn't make any sense really. I am firmly of the opinion that the people that run these Islamic institutions in Australia have very good intentions. If they had a pool of money which they could draw on that was wholly and solely Islamic, they would do so. They don't have it, and as a result, they go to other institutions to get their money. Which brings me to another economic argument. If one were not to get the money from this institution, it means you and I would be economically disadvantaged for the rest of our lives, because how else would we be able to afford to buy a house?
And our generations.
Of course. And your next point is, well, you know, the mortgage in a conventional mortgage is cheaper than Islamic mortgages. But that is not the point. The point of Islamic finance is not the cheapness or expensiveness. It is the philosophy behind it. So even if a person say, I'm going to charge you X amount, which is vastly overpriced, then it is your decision. Look, the logic is simple. If you go into any supermarket, you're not obliged to buy what you see there. You have 10, 15 different places to go to and shop around and get the best price. But that is a different concept to this, because it is impulsive, it is something that you see, and the contract is something which takes place as soon as you pay. In this case, you don't have the ability to pay, and therefore you are dependent on a financier to finance you. You could also raise the argument that if that were not true, why would you then take a normal credit card and use a credit card?
Yeah.
Okay. The credit card allows you to finance your purchases. If you didn't have that credit card, you would have to have the money to pay for it.
Yeah.
Then go to the financial institution, in this case, let's say Commonwealth Bank or NAB or someone. You make use of their finances, but you pay them on time to avoid paying the interest if you are late in payment. Now, if you turn that argument into the argument of a mortgage, the logic remains.
Yep. Dr. Mahmood, one of the things, as a scholar, I feel is that one has to do a lot of research, for anything, any kind of financial intervention that you plan to undertake throughout your life, that is for sure. But the unfortunate part is that many a times ignorance is bliss, like they always say. So the less you know, the better it is, but the more you know, it becomes more complicated. And at the end of the day, I've seen that one of the dilemma that I face is that mostly the scholars are never in complete agreement over one thing or one Islamic banking source or whatever it is. So you would always find one person who would say, no, that's not correct,
Well, that's right. I mean, look, opinions differ, and ikhtilaf, or like difference in opinion is allowed in Islam. So you cannot say that with absolute certainty that what you and I are saying is absolutely correct, because another person would have another opinion which is equally acceptable. But look, I think we should look at the positive side of Islamic finance, because there are lots of good things there. Let's leave aside housing finance, which of course is a very big. But if you take the issue of, let's say, investment and superannuation and so forth, there, I mean, the rules are very, very clear, and the avoidance is very, very clear. You don't need to invest your money in so-called un-Islamic or non-halal investments. And we don't have any problems there at all. This problem is not one that has occurred today. This problem has been there for many, many years, probably about 40 years when the industry started. At that time, this particular institution is Al-Dar al-Mal al-Islami, which was an institution that was started in Saudi Arabia. But believe it or not, Saudi Arabia at that time did not allow any institution that was practicing Islamic finance. And so they had to go to Geneva to set up this institution. Now they had the same problem there. How do we finance Islamic, anything that is Islamically acceptable if we don't have the funds? Which made it very, very difficult for people all over the world. And so in about the early 80s, the Saudis set up the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And within that OIC, they set up the Islamic Development Bank. Now, the Islamic Development Bank was meant to provide sources of funds for any country or any institution in Islamic countries that were needing money to do financing, like home financing. But it's not, home financing is not cheap. I mean, $1 billion in home financing is nothing.
Yeah.
If you were to satisfy the full Muslim market in Australia, you would need, I would say, about close on to $25 to $30 billion. None of the present Islamic institutions that are operating there have that ability or the source of getting that some type of money. And therefore, they are always at a disadvantage. And hence, you can understand why they rely on outside or third-party sources of capital to be able to finance their home lending products.
And that Dr. Mahmood would bring me to the idea that as a Muslim Ummah, we should also think about the larger competition that we are facing as Ummah, because eventually if we are still unsure and we are eventually, for example, in Australia, every Muslim doesn't have a home, so whatever we earn would eventually be going to someone who can get the home.
Yeah, look, I must also refer you to a fatwa that was handed down in 1982 by the European Council of Islamic Fiqh. And a very famous scholar there, together with, of course, many other scholars, issued a fatwa to the effect that in very, very difficult circumstances, where a person is in a position where they have absolutely no way or no one to go to, in circumstances in which they find themselves, then under those circumstances, they said it is jaiz or it is permissible to go to a non-Islamic institution and borrow money to buy a home. Now, many people will say, well, relying on that fatwa, what they've done is they've gone and they bought 1 or 2 houses. But that defeats the purpose of that fatwa, because if you read that fatwa, it was very, very specific. It was meant for people who are in particular need, and the need must be very, very compulsive. In other words, there must be some type of absolute necessity attached to your problem, such that without that necessity, you would be, well, living on the street virtually. So unfortunately, yes, we do face this problem of difference of opinion, but Islamic fiqh is also flexible, understand? We can't be so hard as to ignore, let's say, the wishes of millions of people, knowing that there'll forever be, rentiers, there'll never be able to own or possess their own homes. What do you do then?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you for that. Did anybody else have any more questions before we come to an end to the session? Any questions about Islamic finance, banking, leasing?
I'm hoping to repeat this probably one of the evenings to give people a chance who are working, who would like to know more about this topic, to give them a chance and to listen to this presentation. So I'll arrange with Ramila.
I've just got one question, Doctor.
That's all right.
Before we did record this, so we will be posting it, sending out to everyone who has registered. We did have a lot of people register, but due to other circumstances, as you say, for work or other challenges, people haven't logged on, but they are, asking for the recording, which I will send out to everyone. Got one question here from Sister Sharifa. It says, are there Islamic banks which lend out to other countries like New Zealand finances?
Sorry,
So
is this on the chat?
yes, it is. So if Islamic banks, maybe in Australia or overseas, do they lend out to other citizens from different countries? I would presume no. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not very sure of the question. Does the question refer to people that are living, let's say, in New Zealand and require the finance to come from here?
From Australia, from Malaysia?
No, I would say no, because first of all, how would they secure their mortgageable interest? It's going to be very difficult.
I'm also presuming with the currency differences and all that, that would make it quite difficult for them to guarantee returns, I guess.
No, I think that this is a specific condition in the Australian Banks Act, where they cannot lend money for property that is in a foreign country. Why? Because it is difficult then to exercise your rights over the property where you have defaults.
So I hope that answers the last question for you. Or did you want to add the question? No, I think she's happy with that answer. Did we have any other questions that are coming up? Sorry, that question was private, apologies. So that's why you couldn't see it.
I noticed, Sharifa, will you be able to share the spreadsheet? I think if Sharifa can liaise with you, give her,
yep.
And then we can send it to her. Yes, not a problem.
Okay, so what I'll do, everyone in the chat room, I'll give our email address, CITE@unisa.edu.au. If you can email us asking specifically for any slides or the spreadsheet, and if Dr. Nathie is happy to share it with you, we can send it to you privately, but I don't think we'll make the spreadsheet available freely. Is that correct, Dr. Nathie?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if anybody would like to receive it personally, please email us asking us for the spreadsheet specifically talked about in this webinar, and we will email it to you. Otherwise, I think we can end here, Dr. Nathie, unless you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just a note of caution. I specifically avoided mentioning the institutions here because if I were to say anything that was incorrect, then they have the opportunity to sue me. So I did not use anyone's name except MCCA, and I went into their website themselves and the Amanah website. So I didn't say anything that wasn't there.
Okay, no, excellent. Thank you for that.
So I just want to caution you that I don't give an opinion about any institution over the webinar. It's not right. It's not ethical.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Nathie. Thank you so much for being part of it. We do have Dr. Nathie, if you can just stop sharing your screen, and I will share our upcoming events to everyone, that we do have these live webinars fortnightly, and we've got 2 more coming up soon. I will just share that. Apologies, what's happening? Here we are. So if you can see the screen here, we do have one on the 17th of September, which will be presented by Dr. Nazar Faris. 11 a.m. This is always Adelaide time for your information on leadership and history making, lessons from Omar bin Abdul Aziz. And then we've got 1st of October. Am I correct? Is that right? Am I saying it wrong there? I think. And then we've got 1st of October, Professor Muhammad Abdullah will be presenting. Time has yet to be finalized, and the title. So please keep an eye out. All information is on our website, social media, Facebook, Instagram, and you've got our email addresses here and our website address here. Visit us. There's always updates there. Thank you very much for your time and patience, and we hope to see you in the next webinar, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.